He'd once navigated combat zones with ice in his veins, but nothing prepared him for the moment he realized the $10.3 million stacked behind him wasn't just stolen cartel money. It was bait. And somewhere in the darkness, both the FBI and the most dangerous men in Mexico were already closing in. Before we dive in, let me welcome you to True Crime Case Notes, where we share daring and unfathomable stories that question all you thought you once knew about heists and the psychology of men. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I love getting to know each of you. Click the like, share, and subscribe buttons to stay updated on our latest content, and stay tuned, because tomorrow's story is going to be just as epic, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. The thing about falling from grace is that nobody tells you how long the drop takes. For Captain Mattheus Haaland, it wasn't a sudden plunge. It was a slow, agonizing descent that lasted exactly 15 years, 3 months, and 17 days. Long enough to watch younger pilots take the missions he used to command. Long enough to see his bank account dwindle while his ex-wife's demands grew. Long enough to understand that the United States Air Force had a funny way of saying thank you for your service. They stuck you behind a desk in Tampa and let you process paperwork until your soul turned to ash. The fluorescent lights in Building 7 of MacDill Air Force Base hummed with the kind of persistent drone that made men contemplate violence. Hawk sat at his government-issued desk, staring at a flight manifest for a cargo run to Kandahar, a route he'd flown 47 times, though nobody had bothered to ask. His replacement, Lieutenant Brandon fucking Kowalski, would be piloting it. 26 years old, fresh-faced, with a smile that hadn't yet learned what a surface-to-air missile looked like when it locked onto your bird. Captain Haaland? Kowalski's voice came from behind, dripping with the kind of respectful pity that made Hawk's jaw clench. I had a question about the fuel calculations for tomorrow's run. Hawk didn't turn around. You've got a computer. Use it. Yes, sir. I just thought, with your experience. My experience, Hawk interrupted, finally swiveling his chair to face the kid, is sitting in this box watching pilots half my age fly missions I could do blindfolded. You want my advice? Learn to love disappointment. It's the only thing the Air Force guarantees. Kowalski's smile faltered. He mumbled something about checking with ops and retreated, leaving Hawk alone with the manifest and the familiar weight of obsolescence pressing down on his chest like G-forces during a hard bank. 43 years old, 15 years of service. And what did he have to show for it? A studio apartment that smelled like old Chinese food, an ex-wife who'd traded up to a periodontist named Gary, and a daughter at Florida State who needed $23,000 for next semester's tuition. Money he didn't have, wouldn't have, and couldn't magic into existence no matter how many extra shifts he picked up. The pension would kick in eventually. 7 more years. He'd be 50, worn out, irrelevant, and just comfortable enough to afford cat food and basic cable. The American dream, repackaged as a slow death. That night, in his apartment overlooking a dumpster that had become a luxury condo for Tampa's rat population, Hawk cracked open a bottle of ancient age bourbon. $10 at the liquor store, tasted like gasoline filtered through regret, and opened his laptop. He'd been doing this for 3 weeks now, ever since he'd stumbled across a forum called Contractor's Edge, where ex-military types swapped stories and leads about private security work. Most of it was bullshit. Mercenary fantasies from guys who'd washed out of basic training but still wore dog tags to Applebee's. The usual tough guy posturing about operators and black ops that made Hawk want to throw his laptop through the window. But occasionally, buried in the noise, there were threads worth reading. Discussions about logistics, about routes, about the infrastructure that kept the world's illegal economy humming along just beneath the surface of polite society. Tonight, he found one that made him stop scrolling. The thread was titled Cash Flow Dynamics, Northbound Routes. It had 17 replies, most of them technical, discussing how Mexican cartels move their American drug profits back across the border. Everyone knew about the drugs moving north. That was the headline, the sexy part that politicians ranted about. But the cash moving south, that was the vulnerability. Millions in small bills, 20s and 50s mostly, because hundreds drew too much attention. All that paper needed to be physically transported, which meant trucks, tunnels, and increasingly, aircraft. Hawk read every reply twice, his bourbon forgotten. The cartels used prop planes and helicopters, often purchased at government auctions, decommissioned military birds that still had good bones. They hired ex-military pilots who knew how to fly under radar, who understood that a flight plan was really just a suggestion if you knew which gaps to exploit. He pulled up a separate window and began cross-referencing FAA records with Border Patrol intercept data, information that was technically public, but that nobody bothered to analyze because it required someone with operational experience to see the pattern. Someone who understood flight corridors and surveillance gaps. Someone exactly like him. 3 hours later, with dawn creeping through his blinds and the bourbon bottle 3/4 empty, Hawk saw it. The seam. That microscopic space where procedure met human error, where the system assumed everyone was either perfectly honest or perfectly incompetent. Hawk was neither. He was something more dangerous, competent enough to exploit the system, desperate enough to try, and just drunk enough to start planning. The research became an obsession. He told himself it was intellectual curiosity, a way to keep his brain sharp while his body rotted in that beige office. But late at night, when the bourbon hit just right and the calculator on his phone showed him exactly how deep in debt he was drowning, Hawk knew the truth. He wasn't researching. He was planning. And planning was just one step away from doing. The cartel he identified, he never learned their real name, only their operational call signs, ran a sophisticated network. They island hopped through the Caribbean, using sympathetic governments and corrupt officials to create a highway in the sky. The final push into Mexico happened through several routes, but one stood out, a private airstrip outside Ciudad Juarez that served as a staging area before the cash moved deeper into cartel territory. The beauty of it was the timing. The money would sit there for hours, sometimes overnight, waiting for the next leg of transport. Guarded, yes, but not heavily. The cartels operated on a principle of distributed risk. They didn't put all their eggs in one basket, and they didn't waste resources guarding money that was already in motion. The real security came from reputation. Steal from the cartel, and you died screaming. But what if you could steal the money and disappear before anyone knew who took it? What if you were already invisible? Hawk stared at his computer screen, at the satellite imagery of that airstrip, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Possibility. It was a dangerous feeling, the kind that got men killed. But sitting in that apartment, processing manifests for missions he'd never fly again, dying slowly from irrelevance and debt, Hawk realized something fundamental about risk. Some cages were worse than death. His phone buzzed. A text from his ex-wife, Jennifer, spoke with Madison's bursar office. They need the tuition payment by Friday, or she's dropped from classes. Figure out, Matt. Figure out. As if money was just another problem you could solve with enough determination. As if the military pension and his GS-11 salary could compete with inflation and bad decisions and the fundamental unfairness of being 43 and obsolete. Hawk looked back at the screen at that airstrip in the desert and made a decision that would either save him or destroy him. He needed a contact, someone who knew the operational details, who could provide the kind of intelligence that didn't show up in FAA records. He scrolled through his mental roster of people who'd left the service and ended up in gray areas. Not criminals exactly, but men who'd learned that the rules were different once you took off the uniform. Miguel Torres, former crew chief, stationed at Hurlburt Field before he'd separated under circumstances nobody talked about. Hawk had worked with him on a dozen missions, trusted him with his life in situations where trust was the only currency that mattered. They'd lost touch over the years, but Hawk had heard through the grapevine that Miguel was doing private logistics now, which was code for exactly the kind of work that required not asking questions. Finding him took 2 days and 3 intermediaries. When Miguel finally called back, his voice had the careful neutrality of a man who'd learned to assume every conversation was monitored. Hawk, didn't expect to hear from you, brother. You still flying? That's duty, Hawk said. Living the dream. Miguel laughed, but there was no humor in it. Yeah, I know that song. What can I do for you? Hawk took a breath. This was the moment. Once he asked the question, there was no going back. I need information about cargo routes, specifically cash routes south of the border. The line went quiet for so long Hawk thought Miguel had hung up. Then, that's a dangerous curiosity, my friend. I'm aware. What? Does it matter? Another pause. 5,000. Cash. And we never had this conversation. Done. They met at a rest stop off I-75. Two men who'd once loaded cargo under mortar fire, now conducting business like suburban drug dealers. Miguel handed over a USB drive and took Hawk's envelope without counting it. Professional courtesy between professionals. Whatever you're planning, Miguel said, think twice. These people don't forgive, and they don't forget. Noted, Hawk said. Miguel shook his head, started to walk away, then turned back. One more thing. That intel cost me too. Make sure it's worth it. Hawk drove home with the USB drive burning a hole in his pocket, knowing that he'd just spent most of his remaining savings on information that could either change his life or end it. That night, he plugged in the drive and read everything. Flight schedules, cartel call signs, guard rotations, and one detail that made his pulse quicken. A $10.3 million cash shipment scheduled to stage at the Ciudad Juarez airstrip in 11 days. The window was 8 hours. After that, an armed convoy would arrive to transport the money to Sinaloa. 8 hours to steal $10 million and vanish. Hawk opened his calculator and did the math. After paying off his debts, securing Madison's education, and setting aside enough to disappear properly, he'd have enough to start over somewhere the Air Force's reach didn't extend. He looked around his apartment, at the peeling paint and the dumpster view and the life that had shrunk down to this pathetic single room, and he made his choice. Some cages were worse than death, and some risks were worth taking. Planning a heist was like planning a combat mission. You lived or died based on the details nobody else thought about. Hawk had 11 days to prepare, which was both too much time and not nearly enough. Too much time gave you space to second-guess, to imagine all the ways a plan could unravel. Not enough time meant improvisation, and improvisation got you killed. He started with a helicopter. You couldn't just steal $10 million and hitchhike home. He needed aircraft, something with range and cargo capacity, and ideally something nobody would miss for at least 48 hours. The charter company he'd worked for part-time during his first year at the desk job, Skybridge Aviation, kept a Bell 407 that they used for corporate runs and the occasional medical transport. Hawk had flown it dozens of times, knew its quirks, knew that the company's weekend inventory checks were about as thorough as a TSA pat-down on a congressman. The owner, Dale Kowalski, no relation to Lieutenant Brandon fucking Kowalski, though Hawk enjoyed the cosmic irony, was a former Army pilot who'd parlayed his service into a decent civilian operation. He trusted Hawk, which meant the security codes were the same ones they'd used 2 years ago, and the keys were kept in a lockbox that Hawk had helped install. Trust. It was funny how easily people gave it away, how they assumed the uniform meant something permanent about your character. Hawk had worn that uniform for 15 years, and it had meant everything right up until the moment it meant nothing at all. On day 3 of his planning, Hawk drove out to Skybridge's hangar at Peter O. Knight Airport, ostensibly to catch up with Dale and maybe pick up some spare hours. The Bell 407 sat in the back, gleaming under the fluorescent lights like a promise. He walked around it, running his hands along the fuselage, mentally calculating fuel capacity against distance. Ciudad Juarez was roughly 1,200 miles from Tampa. The Bell 407 had a range of about 370 miles, which meant refueling stops, complications, witnesses, paper trails. Unless you didn't file flight plan. Unless you flew low enough to stay under radar coverage, hugging terrain, and using routes that assumed nobody was stupid enough to navigate by visual reference in 2024. The cartels did it all the time, and they weren't exactly working with NASA-level talent. Thinking about coming back, Dale's voice came from behind him, startling Hawk out of his calculations. Hawk turned, forcing a smile, just missing the feel of a real cockpit. Desks don't bank when you turn them. Dale laughed, wiping grease off his hands with a rag that looked like it had last been cleaned during the Clinton administration. I've got some runs next month if you're interested. Medical transport down to the Keys. Pays decent. Yeah, maybe. I'll let you know. They talked for another 20 minutes. Bullshit about aircraft maintenance and fuel costs, and whether the Buccaneers would ever figure out how to win in January. And the whole time Hawk was cataloging details. Security camera angles. The lockbox location. Dale's habit of leaving early on Fridays for his standing tee time at Rocky Point Golf Course. Theft was just observation with criminal intent. The FAA credentials were trickier. When Hawk had transitioned to desk duty, his flight status had been technically deactivated, but the military bureaucracy moved at the speed of continental drift. His credentials still existed in the system, flagged as inactive but not fully purged. He discovered this accidentally 6 months ago while processing paperwork. A glitch where inactive credentials could still be used to file flight plans if you knew which forms to submit and which databases hadn't been updated. It was the kind of vulnerability that should have been closed years ago, but government IT security was designed by the lowest bidder and maintained by people who treated password 123 as acceptable cybersecurity. Hawk filed a test flight plan using his old credentials, routing a fictional cargo run from Tampa to Atlanta. The system accepted it without question, auto-approved within 6 hours. He deleted the flight plan immediately, but the damage, or rather, the opportunity, was done. He could file a ghost flight, something that existed in the system just long enough to provide cover, then disappear before anyone noticed the discrepancy. On day 6, Hawk drove to a gun show in Lakeland and paid cash for a Glock 19. No background check, no paperwork, just an enthusiastic seller who believed the Second Amendment meant never having to say you're regulated. Hawk had qualified expert with the M9 in the service, but the Glock felt foreign in his hand, heavier than memory, more real than the theoretical violence he'd been planning. He took it to a private range in Hillsborough County, the kind of place where nobody asked your name as long as you paid in cash and didn't shoot yourself in the foot. 50 rounds through the weapon, enough to remember the basics: breathe, squeeze, follow through. The paper target's center mass looked like a moth-eaten sweater by the time he finished. Nice grouping, the range officer said, an older man with an NRA hat and the kind of friendly racism that came packaged as patriotism. Military. Used to be, Hawk said, ejecting the magazine. Semper Fi. Air Force. The man's smile cooled slightly, the way it always did when you admitted to being in the branch that had air conditioning and hot meals. Well, you can shoot anyway. That's something. Hawk paid for another 50 rounds and put them through the target until muscle memory replaced thought. The cartels employed guards who'd grown up with violence, who'd killed before breakfast more times than Hawk had filed flight reports. He couldn't afford hesitation. Hesitation was just another word for dying slowly. On day 8, reality hit him during a 2 a.m. panic attack that left him gasping for air on his apartment floor. What the hell was he doing? This wasn't a video game or a movie where the protagonist pulled off impossible heists and walked away clean. This was real life, where people who stole from cartels ended up in barrels or shallow graves or viral videos that serve as cautionary tales. Miguel's warning echoed in his head. These people don't forgive, and they don't forget. Hawk pulled himself up to the bathroom sink and stared at his reflection. 43 years old, gray creeping into his temples, lines around his eyes from squinting into too many suns in too many countries. He looked tired. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who'd given everything to a system that had chewed him up and spit him out with a pension plan and a handshake. His phone buzzed. Another text from Jennifer. Madison's bursar office called again. I told them you'd handle it. Don't make me look like a liar, Matt. Don't make me look like a liar. As if his entire life wasn't already a lie. Pretending the desk job mattered, pretending the pension would be enough, pretending he hadn't already decided to burn it all down the moment he'd opened that USB drive. Hawk splashed water on his face and made himself a promise. If he was going to do this, he'd do it right. No half measures. No hesitation. The military had taught him that committed action, even in the wrong direction, was better than paralysis. On day 9, he drove the route from Tampa to the Mexican border, mapping fuel stops at small municipal airports where cash still talked and nobody asked too many questions. He identified 3 locations: Slidell, Louisiana, Laredo, Texas, and a private strip outside Del Rio that catered to the kind of clientele who appreciated discretion. He pre-positioned fuel payments using prepaid debit cards purchased at gas stations, untraceable and clean. On day 10, he called his daughter. Madison answered on the fourth ring, her voice carrying that particular college student mixture of exhaustion and mild annoyance. "Hey, Dad. What's up?" "Nothing. Just wanted to check in. How's the semester going?" "It's fine. Busy. I've got a paper due Monday that's kicking my ass." They talked for 15 minutes about nothing important, her roommate's drama, whether she declared a major yet, the cafeteria food that tasted like institutional sadness. Normal conversation with his normal daughter, who had no idea her father was planning to rob a drug cartel in 48 hours. "Dad," Madison said, her voice softening. "Is everything okay? You sound weird." "I'm fine, honey. Just tired. Desk job's not exactly thrilling." "Mom said you're handling the tuition thing?" "Yeah, it's handled. Don't worry about it." "Thanks, Dad. I know things have been tight since the divorce." "Tight? What a polite word for financial catastrophe." "It's fine. Focus on school. That's what matters." After they hung up, Hawk sat in his car in the McDill parking lot and let himself feel the weight of what he was about to do. He was risking everything, his freedom, his life, his daughter's respect, if this went sideways. But he was also giving her a chance at a future that didn't involve crushing debt and the same slow death that had claimed him. Some cages were worse than death, and some fathers would walk through fire to spare their children from burning. On day 11, Hawk woke at 4 a.m., showered, and put on jeans and a windbreaker. Nothing tactical, nothing that would stand out. He looked like any other middle-aged man running weekend errands. He ate breakfast at a Waffle House off Dale, Mabry Highway, forcing down eggs and hash browns that tasted like cardboard. His stomach was a knot of acid and adrenaline, but he needed fuel. Combat runs had taught him that. At 6:47 a.m., he drove to Skybridge Aviation. Dale's truck wasn't in the parking lot. Tea time at Rocky Point, just like clockwork. The weekend skeleton crew consisted of one mechanic who was currently elbow-deep in a Cessna's engine and wouldn't notice if the hangar spontaneously combusted. Hawk used his old security code. The door clicked open. Inside, the Bell 407 waited, fueled and ready for Monday's scheduled corporate run. He grabbed the keys from the lockbox, did a pre-flight check that would have made his instructors proud, and started the engine. The mechanic looked up, saw Hawk giving a friendly wave, and went back to his work. Just another pilot, just another aircraft, just another Saturday morning at a small aviation company where everyone trusted everyone because that's what made the operation work. Hawk lifted off at 7:23 a.m., the Tampa skyline shrinking behind him as he turned west, then south, flying low and fast toward a desert airstrip where $10 million waited and his old life would finally, mercifully end. The dice were thrown. The plan was in motion. And somewhere in his chest, beneath the fear and the adrenaline and the crazy, desperate hope, Hawk felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt alive. The thing about crossing the line is that you don't feel it when it happens. There's no dramatic moment, no point where the universe pauses to ask if you're sure. 1 minute you're a law-abiding veteran processing paperwork in Tampa, and the next you're flying a stolen helicopter across state lines toward a cartel cash house, and the transition feels as natural as breathing. Hawk kept the Bell 407 low, hugging the Gulf Coast at an altitude that made seagulls look down on him with concern. This was old-school flying, the kind that relied on visual reference and spatial awareness instead of GPS waypoints and autopilot. The kind of flying that reminded you aircraft were originally designed by people who thought gravity was more of a suggestion than a law. His first fuel stop was Slidell, Louisiana, a municipal airport that serviced everything from crop dusters to the occasional DEA surveillance plane. Hawk landed at 10:47 a.m., refueled using one of his prepaid cards, and was back in the air within 20 minutes. The attendant was a kid who looked about 19, more interested in his phone than the middle-aged pilot who paid cash and didn't make small talk. "Nice day for flying," the kid offered, not looking up from his screen. "Every day's nice when you're not on the ground," Hawk replied, which was the kind of pilot wisdom that sounded profound but actually meant nothing. Back in the air, Hawk's mind began playing the operation on repeat. He'd rehearsed it 100 times in his apartment, moving through each step like a chess player, visualizing checkmate. Land a mile from the airstrip. Approach on foot. Neutralize the guards. Non-lethally if possible, because murder charges were a complication he didn't need. Load the cash. Extract. Disappear into the gaps in Border Patrol coverage that Miguel's intelligence had identified. Simple. Clean. Assuming nothing went wrong. But things always went wrong. Hawk had learned that lesson in Afghanistan when a routine supply run turned into a 12-hour firefight because someone's intelligence was 3 days old. The military taught you to plan for contingencies, but the real lesson was simpler. Accept that chaos was coming and learn to dance with it. The Texas Panhandle opened up beneath him around 3 p.m. Endless flatland that made Florida look geographically ambitious. He refueled in Laredo, drawing slightly more attention this time from an attendant who actually looked at him. "Long haul?" the man asked, a weathered Mexican-American with the kind of face that had seen things and decided not to ask about them. Heading to El Paso, Hawk lied smoothly. "Corporate run. Rich guy wants his helicopter delivered yesterday." The attendant nodded, accepting this because in Texas, rich people doing weird things with aircraft was barely worth mentioning. "Weather's supposed to kick up tonight. Watch out for crosswinds near the mountains." "Appreciate it," Hawk said, paying and leaving before the conversation could get more specific. The final leg took him into the golden hour, that magic time when the sun turned the desert into something almost beautiful. He crossed into Mexico at a point where the border was more theoretical than actual. No wall, no patrol, just scrubland that didn't care which country claimed it. His altimeter read 150 feet, low enough that anyone looking at radar would mistake him for ground clutter or a particularly ambitious bird. Miguel's intel put the airstrip at coordinates that Hawk had memorized so thoroughly they'd probably be carved on his tombstone. He spotted it just after 6 p.m., exactly where it was supposed to be, a scar of packed dirt in the desert with a rusted hangar that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and poor decisions. Hawk circled once, high enough to survey, but low enough to avoid drawing attention from anyone who might be watching. 2 guards, just like Miguel had said, one leaning against the hangar, smoking, the other sitting in a folding chair that had seen better decades, scrolling through his phone with the dedication of a man being paid to be bored. No visible vehicles beyond a beat-up Ford F-150 that probably belonged to the guards. No signs of the convoy that would arrive in 8 hours. The money was in there, waiting, and the only thing standing between Hawk and $10 million was 2 men who looked about as motivated as DMV employees. He landed a mile out, setting down in a depression that would hide the helicopter from casual observation. The engine wound down with a whine that sounded too loud in the desert silence. Hawk sat there for a moment, breathing, letting his heart rate settle. This was it, the moment where planning became action, where theory met reality. He checked the Glock, chambered a round, and stuck it in his waistband. Then he grabbed a small backpack containing zip ties, a flashlight, and a roll of duct tape. The holy trinity of improvised operations. He looked at himself in the helicopter's mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. Same face, different person. The Air Force captain was gone. What was left was something harder, more desperate, more willing to do what needed doing. Hawk started walking. The desert had that peculiar silence that wasn't really silence at all. Wind rustling through scrub brush, the distant cry of something that sounded like a hawk but probably wasn't, the crunch of his boots on hardpan. He'd spent time in deserts before, in countries where the heat tried to kill you and the locals were only slightly less hostile. This felt familiar. Dangerous, but familiar. He approached from the west, using the setting sun to his advantage. Anyone looking his way would be staring into glare. Basic tactics, the kind they taught in survival school to officers who would probably never need it. Except Hawk needed it now. The guard with the cigarette spotted him first. To his credit, he didn't immediately reach for his weapon, just straightened up and called out in Spanish. Hawk's Spanish was passable, enough to understand the guard was asking who the hell he was and what the hell he wanted. Hawk raised his hands, projecting confusion and mild panic. "Mi helicoptero," he said, pointing vaguely behind him. Problema con el motor. My helicopter. Engine trouble. The guard relaxed slightly. Gringos with broken helicopters were probably a semi-regular occurrence in this part of the world. He called to his partner, who looked up from his phone with the expression of someone whose boring shift just got marginally less boring. Hawk walked closer, still playing the helpless pilot, asking to use their radio. The guards exchanged looks, the universal language of "is this guy for real?" And the smoker gestured for Hawk to approach. They were both armed, pistols visible in hip holsters, but neither had drawn. Why would they? He was just some lost pilot, probably running charter flights for tourists too cheap or too sketchy to use legitimate services. That calculation, that assumption of normalcy, was going to cost them. Hawk got within 10 feet, close enough to see the brand of cigarettes the guard smoked, close enough to smell the beer on the second guard's breath. Then he moved. The pistol whip was textbook perfect, catching the smoker behind the ear with just enough force to drop him without causing permanent damage. The man collapsed like someone had cut his strings, cigarette tumbling from his lips. The second guard reacted faster than Hawk expected, hand going for his weapon, but his reflexes were dulled by heat and boredom and the beer he'd been drinking to make the shift tolerable. Hawk closed the distance before the gun cleared leather, driving his shoulder into the man's chest and slamming him back against the hangar wall. The guard's head bounced off corrugated metal with a sound like a gong, and his eyes lost focus. Hawk hit him once more, controlled and efficient, and the man slid down the wall to join his partner in unconsciousness. 2 minutes. From approach to neutralization, 2 minutes. Hawk's hands were shaking, adrenaline flooding his system, but he forced himself to breathe and think. He zip-tied both guards' wrists and ankles, then duct-taped their mouths. Not cruel, just thorough. When they woke up, and they would, probably within an hour, they'd be uncomfortable but unharmed. Professional, not personal. Hawk grabbed the hangar keys from the smoker's belt and unlocked the door. It swung open with a screech of protesting metal, and there it was. $10.3 million. The money sat on wooden pallets, shrink-wrapped in clear plastic that reflected the fading sunlight like giant crystals. Each bundle was marked with symbols Hawk didn't recognize but understood perfectly. Cartel insignias, warnings written in the language of violence. This money belonged to people who killed as casually as most folks check their email. And he was stealing it. Hawk stood there for a moment, letting the reality wash over him. This wasn't theoretical anymore. This wasn't planning or research or desperate calculations at 2 a.m. This was actual cartel money, the kind of money that came with body counts and mass graves, and the kind of consequences that made prison look like summer camp. He thought about his daughter, about the tuition bill, about the studio apartment and the rat-infested dumpster and the 26-year-old lieutenant who called him sir with pity in his voice. He thought about every choice that had led him here, to this hangar in the middle of nowhere, stealing from the kind of people who made documentaries about how creative they got with chainsaws. Then he started loading. The Bell 407's cargo capacity was about 2,200 pounds. Cash was heavier than most people realized. $1 million in 20s weighed about 110 pounds. Hawk did quick math. He could take roughly $8 million without maxing out the helicopter's weight limits. He'd have to leave money behind. The irony wasn't lost on him. Breaking the biggest law of his life and still having to worry about aircraft specifications. He worked methodically, dragging pallets to the helicopter, loading bundles with the efficiency of someone who'd spent 15 years managing cargo in combat zones. 37 minutes from start to finish. His back screamed, his hands were torn from the plastic wrap, and sweat soaked through his windbreaker, but the money was loaded. Hawk took one last look at the remaining pallets, roughly $2 million he was leaving behind. Part of him wanted to try squeezing it in, but that was greed talking, and greed got pilots killed. He sealed the hangar, walked back to check on the guards, still unconscious, still breathing, and returned to the helicopter. The engine started with a roar that sounded like freedom. Hawk lifted off at 6:58 p.m., just as the sun touched the horizon and turned the desert blood red. He flew north, low and fast, following the terrain and watching his fuel gauge with the intensity of a man whose life depended on mathematics. 8 hours until the convoy arrived. 8 hours until someone discovered the guards and the missing money. 8 hours until the cartels started hunting whoever was stupid enough to rob them. But Hawk would be long gone by then. Or, at least, that was the plan. He checked his GPS, still heading north, staying under radar, the American border getting closer with every mile. His hands had stopped shaking. His heart rate was almost normal. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. Behind him, wrapped in plastic and marked with warnings, sat more money than most people earned in 10 lifetimes. Blood money. Cartel money. His money now. Hawk allowed himself a small smile, the first genuine expression of joy he'd felt in months. He had no idea that 3 of those pallets contained GPS trackers, or that Special Agent Denise Park was watching his helicopter's icon crawl across her screen, or that he wasn't a thief at all. He was bait, and the trap was already closing. The safe house was a storage unit in Brownsville, Texas, one of those sprawling self-storage facilities where people kept the accumulated debris of their lives and nobody asked questions as long as the rent checks cleared. Hawk had rented it 3 months ago under a fake name, paying cash 6 months in advance to a manager who looked like he'd stopped caring about regulation sometime during the Reagan administration. Unit 247 sat in the back corner, climate-controlled and large enough to park a small car. Or, as it turned out, to stack $8 million in cartel cash while you figured out your next move. Hawk landed the Bell 407 at a private airstrip outside Harlingen at 11:34 p.m., the kind of place that catered to crop dusters and the occasional smuggler who understood that discretion was worth paying extra for. He'd scouted it during his planning phase. No security cameras, no nosy staff, just an automated gate that accepted his prepaid code and let him park in the shadows. Getting the money from the helicopter to the storage unit required 3 trips in a rental van he'd arranged weeks ago, another prepaid transaction that existed only in cash and fake IDs. By 3 a.m., every bundle was stacked in Unit 247, the door was locked, and Hawk was sitting in a Denny's parking lot trying to remember how to breathe normally. He'd done it. He'd actually pulled it off. The rational part of his brain, the part that had kept him alive through 15 years of military service, knew he should be planning his next move. But the animal part, the part that was still flooding his system with adrenaline and endorphins, just wanted to sit in this parking lot and stare at the digital numbers on the van's dashboard. 3:47 a.m. In Ciudad Juarez, the convoy would be arriving soon. The guard would be discovered. The missing money would be reported. And somewhere, cartel leadership would be making phone calls that ended with people screaming. Hawk forced himself to move. He drove the van to a long-term parking lot at Valley International Airport, wiped down the interior with bleach wipes, and left it with keys in the visor for the rental company to eventually find. Then he caught a cab back to the storage facility, paid cash, and told the driver he was picking up his motorcycle. Inside Unit 247, surrounded by more money than his father had earned in his entire life, Hawk finally let himself feel the weight of what he'd done. He sat on a concrete floor, back against a pallet of cash, and laughed. Not the manic laugh of someone losing their grip on sanity, but the exhausted laugh of someone who'd bet everything on red and watched the wheel stop exactly where it needed to. His phone buzzed. A text from Dale at Skybridge Aviation. "Hey man, you know anything about the Bell 407? Can't find it and got a client scheduled for Monday." Hawk stared at the message, his euphoria evaporating like water on hot pavement. He'd known this moment would come, but seeing it in black and white made it real. The helicopter was stolen. Dale would report it. The FAA would investigate. His name would come up, unless he controlled the narrative. Hawk typed back, "Shit, Dale. I took it up Saturday morning for a quick flight. Needed to clear my head. Had some engine trouble over the Gulf. Bird went down about 30 miles out. I barely made it out. Coast Guard been looking, but no luck recovering it. I was going to call you, but I've been dealing with the Coast Guard reports. I'm so sorry, man." He hit send before he could second-guess the lie. Then he powered off his phone, removed the SIM card, and crushed it under his heel. That phone, that identity, that version of Mattheus Haaland, all of it needed to disappear. For the next 72 hours, Hawk lived in that storage unit like a hermit in a cave made of currency. He slept in 2-hour intervals, ate convenience store food that tasted like cardboard, and obsessively checked news reports on a burner laptop connected to the facility's Wi-Fi. The cartel heist made local news in El Paso on day 2. A brief story about a robbery at an undisclosed location. No details, no dollar amounts. The cartels didn't advertise their losses. Bad for business. But Hawk knew they'd be looking. Quietly, efficiently, violently. On day 3, while transferring money to organize it by denomination, Hawk found it. A GPS tracker, no bigger than a stick of gum, embedded in one of the shrink-wrapped pallets, its small LED blinking red like a tiny heartbeat. His blood turned to ice water. Hawk's hands trembled as he tore through the other pallets, systematically checking each bundle. He found 2 more trackers, both active, both transmitting. For 3 days, he'd been broadcasting his location like a lighthouse in a storm. The FBI, it had to be. The cartels wouldn't use GPS trackers. They'd just follow the money with their own people. But the feds? This was exactly their playbook. Let the thief take the bait, follow them to the stash house, then sweep in with arrests and press conferences. Hawk's mind raced through scenarios, each one worse than the last. How long had they been tracking him? Were they watching the storage unit right now? Was this the moment before the door crashed open and his new life ended before it started? He forced himself to think like a pilot, not a panic victim. Assess the situation. Identify options. Execute. The trackers were on 3 pallets, roughly $3 million worth. The rest of the money appeared clean. If the FBI was watching, they were waiting for something. Waiting for him to move the money. Waiting for him to contact a buyer. Waiting for him to make a mistake that would give them leverage. Hawk made a decision that would either save him or confirm his stupidity. He loaded the 3 track pallets into a stolen pickup truck, a Ford F-250 he'd hotwired from a construction site, adding Grand Theft Auto to his growing list of felonies. Then he drove north for 2 hours until he found what he was looking for, Lake Amistad, a massive reservoir on the Texas-Mexico border. At 4 a.m., with no witnesses except the stars, Hawk drove the truck to a boat ramp, put it in neutral, and watched $3 million sink into dark water. The trackers would still transmit for a while, sending their signals from the bottom of the lake, leading the FBI to exactly nothing. It hurt. $3 million gone, but the remaining $5 million was clean, and alive was better than rich and dead. Back at the storage unit, Hawk began Phase 2, disappearing. He'd learned about operational security from a master sergeant in Iraq who'd run black operations that officially never happened. The key to vanishing wasn't running to some exotic location. It was becoming someone else entirely. New identity, new history, new life. Hawk had prepared for this during his planning phase. He'd acquired documents through channels that existed in the gray space between legal and catastrophically illegal. A social security number that belonged to a man who died 30 years ago, but whose death certificate had never been properly filed. A driver's license from Oklahoma, where the DMV was still using systems that predated the internet, credit cards, and a name that existed only on paper. He became Richard Moss, age 47, former insurance adjuster from Tulsa. Boring, forgettable, the kind of person who disappeared into the background of any room. The money had to be laundered. Hawk knew enough to understand you couldn't just deposit $8 million, or rather, $5 million now, without triggering every alarm the IRS and FinCEN had ever invented. He needed time. He needed infrastructure. He needed to be smart. What he did next would have made his military ethics instructor weep. Hawk divided the money into manageable chunks and began a slow, methodical process of washing it through legitimate channels. He bought a failing used car dealership in McAllen, paying cash and running at a loss while reporting inflated sales that never happened. He purchased rental properties in San Antonio, paying cash and generating fake rental income. He invested in cryptocurrency through exchanges that didn't ask too many questions, converting cash into digital assets that could move across borders without triggering scrutiny. It was tedious. It was risky. It took 6 months of careful transactions, of living in cheap motels and eating gas station food, of being Richard Moss, the boring insurance adjuster who somehow had enough savings to invest in distressed properties. But it worked. Slowly, impossibly, the dirty money became clean. During those 6 months, Hawk thought a lot about his daughter. He couldn't contact Madison. That would blow everything. But he watched her from a distance, using social media burner accounts to see her thriving at Florida State. She posted pictures of football games and study groups and the kind of carefree college life that his theft had purchased. The tuition had been paid through an anonymous scholarship, one of Hawk's first moves with the laundered money, routed through enough layers that it couldn't be traced back to him. He'd saved her. At the cost of everything else, he'd saved her. In month 7, Hawk made his mistake. He'd gotten comfortable. That was the problem with successful crimes. They made you forget that success was often just delayed failure. He'd been using the same burner phone for 3 weeks, longer than his self-imposed security protocol allowed. He'd been staying at the same extended-stay hotel in San Antonio for a month. He'd developed a routine. Routines got you caught. The man who approached him in the hotel parking lot was unremarkable. Average height, average build, the kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after seeing it. But the way he moved, the way he positioned himself to block Hawk's path to his car, that was professional. Richard Moss, the man said. Not a question, a statement. Hawk's hand moved toward the Glock in his waistband, but the man held up empty hands. Relax. I'm not here to arrest you. I'm here to offer you a choice. I don't know what you're talking about. The man smiled. Captain Mattheus Haaland, formerly of the United States Air Force. Currently deceased, according to official records. Except you're not dead, are you? You're here, living under a fake name, spending money that came from a cartel robbery 7 months ago. Hawk's world tilted. Who are you? Special Agent Chris Vega, FBI. And before you run, you should know we've had eyes on you for the last 90 days. We know about the car dealership, the rental properties, the cryptocurrency accounts. We know everything. Then why haven't you arrested me? Vega's smile widened. Because we don't want you, Captain. We want them. The cartels. The network. And you're going to help us get them. Hawk stared at this federal agent who just casually dismantled his entire new life, and he realized something that made his stomach drop. The game wasn't over. It had just entered a whole new level. What makes you think I'd help you? Because your other option is spending the rest of your life in federal prison while your daughter learns her father is a thief who faked his own death. Or Vega pulled out a folder, handed it to Hawk. You work with us, and when this is done, Richard Moss gets to keep his new life. Clean slate. No charges. You disappear for real, and we get the cartel. Hawk opened the folder. Inside were photographs, surveillance reports, and a name he'd tried very hard to forget. Miguel Torres. Your friend Miguel, Vega said, has been our confidential informant for 18 months. He set you up, Captain. That whole heist? That was us, using you to draw out cartel leadership. Except you went off script when you found our trackers. That was impressive, by the way. Most people would have panicked. So what do you want? We want you to become a buyer. Tell the cartel you have their money. Not all of it, obviously, since you dumped $3 million in a lake, but enough that they'll want it back. We arrange a meeting, you are a wire, and we roll up everyone who shows up. They'll kill me. Probably. Unless you're very good at acting, and we're very good at our jobs. Vega's smile never wavered. But it's better odds than the prison scenario, don't you think? Hawk stood there in that parking lot, his stolen life crumbling around him, and realized he'd been played from the beginning. Miguel, the FBI, the whole elaborate heist. He thought he was the chess player, but he'd been a pawn all along. And if I say no, Vega shrugged. Then we arrest you right now. And Richard Moss becomes a very boring footnote in a very long prosecution. Your choice, Captain. It wasn't really a choice at all. When do we start? Hawk asked. The thing about working for the FBI when you're a wanted criminal is that trust becomes a theoretical concept, something other people have, like retirement plans or healthy relationships. For the next 3 months, Hawk lived in a state of permanent paranoia, wearing a wire that itched like psychological poison ivy and attending meetings with federal agents who smiled while holding his entire future hostage. Special Agent Denise Park turned out to be the architect of the whole operation. A woman in her late 40s with gray streak hair and the kind of calm intensity that made Hawk think of fighter pilots moments before weapons release. She ran the briefings from a safe house in Austin, surrounded by surveillance equipment and photographs of cartel members who all looked like they'd learned to smile by watching horror movies. The target is Joaquin Salazar, Park explained during their first strategy session, pointing to a photograph of a man who looked more like a corporate executive than a drug lord. Expensive suit, carefully groomed beard, eyes that calculated profit margins in human suffering. He runs financial operations for the Jalisco Cartel's Texas network. Miguel was feeding us intelligence on his cash routes for 18 months before you decided to play cowboy. Hawk bristled at the characterization, but kept his mouth shut. He was a prisoner with slightly more comfortable accommodations, and prisoners didn't get to argue. Salazar knows someone hid his shipment. Park continued. What he doesn't know is who. Miguel fed him a story about a rogue American pilot, someone with military experience who's looking to get into the business. That's where you come in. You want me to approach a cartel lieutenant and tell him I have his money? Not all of it. Remember, you dumped $3 million in the lake. We're telling him you've got $5 million and you want to negotiate a finder's fee for its return. 10%, $500,000 for bringing back the rest. Agent Vega, the man who'd confronted Hawk in the parking lot, leaned forward. Salazar's greedy, but he's not stupid. He'll want to verify you're legitimate before he commits to a meeting. We've built you a background. Richard Moss, former Air Force pilot with a dishonorable discharge for theft, currently running small-time smuggling operations out of Texas. It's close enough to the truth that you won't have to act much. The irony wasn't lost on Hawk. They were using his real story as cover for a fake identity. What's to stop him from just killing me and taking the money? Hawk asked. Park smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Absolutely nothing. Which is why you're going to be very convincing about having insurance, documents, evidence, people who know where you are. Make him believe that killing you triggers a domino effect he doesn't want. Can you do that? Hawk thought about 15 years of flying cargo into war zones, of landing on improvised strips while people shot at him, of staying calm when every instinct screamed to panic. Yeah, I can do that. The setup took 6 weeks. Park's team established a paper trail for Richard Moss that would satisfy even paranoid cartel verification. Police reports from the fake dishonorable discharge, credit history showing gradual financial decline, social media presence documenting a bitter ex-military guy who decided the system owed him. They rented Hawk a house in a middle-class San Antonio neighborhood, gave him a truck with hidden surveillance equipment, and coach him on speaking patterns that would sell the character. You're angry, Park instructed during one of their rehearsals. Not desperate. Desperation makes you weak. You're angry at the Air Force, angry at the system, angry enough to take what you think you deserve. That's the man Salazar will understand. That's the man he'll believe. Hawk practiced in mirrors, adjusting his posture and his tone until Richard Moss felt more real than Mattheus Haaland ever had. Maybe that was the trick to deep cover. Become the lie so completely that the truth became the disguise. The initial contact happened through Miguel, who'd agreed to play intermediary in exchange for his own immunity deal. Hawk met him at a barbecue joint in Laredo, both of them pretending their friendship hadn't been a federal operation from the start. You look good, hermano, Miguel said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. For a dead man. Funny how that works. Hawk kept his voice neutral, professional. The wire itched beneath his shirt, recording every word. You talk to your people? I did. They're interested, but they want to meet face to face. Verify you're legitimate. When? 3 days. There's an industrial park outside Nuevo Laredo. Come alone. They'll have people watching, so don't try anything creative. Miguel paused, lowered his voice. For what it's worth, I didn't want to burn you. But 20 years in federal prison has a way of clarifying your priorities. Hawk wanted to hate him. Should have hated him. But sitting across from Miguel, seeing the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of choices that had backed him into corners, Hawk understood. They were both just men trying to survive systems bigger than themselves. Yeah, Hawk said, I get it. The 3 days before the meeting were the longest of Hawk's life. Park's team ran scenarios, gaming out every possible contingency. They'd have surveillance teams in position, snipers if things went sideways, extraction protocols if Salazar decided to take Hawk instead of making a deal. But there were gaps in the coverage, physical limitations, communication dead zones, moments where Hawk would be truly alone with men who killed people for cost-benefit reasons. "You don't have to do this," Park said the night before, sitting across from Hawk in the safe house. Her FBI persona had cracked slightly, revealing something almost human underneath. "We got enough evidence to prosecute you, but we don't have enough to break the cartel's financial network. That's what we really want. If you walk away now, you go to prison. But you go to prison alive." Hawk thought about his daughter, about the scholarship money that had paid her tuition, about the future he'd stolen and laundered and tried to build from blood-stained cash. "If I do this and it works, Richard Moss really gets to walk away. That's the deal. And Mattheus Haaland stays dead?" Park nodded. "Your service record shows you died in a helicopter accident over the Gulf of Mexico. Your ex-wife collected the life insurance. Your daughter thinks you're gone. As far as the world is concerned, Captain Haaland is fish food. It should have hurt more than it did." But Hawk had mourned his old life months ago, back when he'd made the choice to steal from people who didn't forgive theft. Mattheus Haaland had died the moment he loaded that first pallet of cash. Everything since had just been paperwork. "Then let's finish this," Hawk said. The industrial park looked exactly like the kind of place where bodies got discovered months later. Abandoned warehouses, cracked pavement, the general atmosphere of economic decline mixed with criminal opportunity. Hawk drove his truck through the gate at exactly 2 p.m., alone as instructed, trying not to think about the fact that Park's surveillance team was 3 miles away and might as well have been on the moon. 3 SUVs waited in the central lot, arranged in a formation that controlled all exit points. Professional. Hawk parked, killed the engine, and waited. The wire beneath his shirt felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. A man emerged from the center SUV. Not Salazar, but someone who worked for him. Young, maybe late 20s, with the kind of casual violence in his posture that came from killing people before his frontal lobe fully developed. He approached Hawk's truck, gestured for him to step out. The pat-down was thorough. Too thorough. Hawk felt hands running over his chest, his back, his waistband. If they found the wire, this ended badly. But Park's team had hidden it in a modified belt buckle, sophisticated enough to pass casual inspection. "He's clean," the young man called out. Joaquin Salazar stepped from the SUV like a businessman late for a meeting. Expensive suit, no visible weapons, the kind of calculated calm that came from knowing you had 20 armed men within earshot. He studied Hawk with the intensity of someone evaluating livestock. "Richard Moss," Salazar said, his English perfect and unaccented. "The pilot who stole my money. I prefer to think of it as recovery and return," Hawk replied, channeling every ounce of Richard Moss's bitter confidence. "You left $10 million sitting with 2 guards who couldn't secure a lemonade stand. I simply relocated it somewhere safer." Salazar smiled. "You have balls. Stupid, but balls nonetheless. Where's my money? Somewhere you'll never find it without me. Which is why we're having this conversation instead of you torturing Miguel until he gives up information he doesn't have. Miguel told us you want a finder's fee. 10%. That's correct. $500,000, and you get back $5 million. Consider the other $5 million attacks on poor security practices." The slap came fast, delivered by the young man who'd patted him down. Hawk's head snapped sideways, pain exploding across his cheek. He tasted blood, but forced himself not to react beyond spitting. "You don't make jokes about my money," Salazar said, his calm veneer cracking slightly. "You stole from people who own politicians and police chiefs. You stole from people who have killed for less than the loose change in your pocket. The only reason you're still breathing is because I want that money more than I want the satisfaction of watching you die." Hawk straightened, meeting Salazar's eyes. "Then we have a deal?" Salazar studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "We have a deal, but I want proof first. Tomorrow, you show me where the money is. My people verify it's legitimate. Then you get your finder's fee, and we never see each other again. Works for me. One more thing." Salazar stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If this is a setup, if you're working with the police, the DEA, The FBI? I won't kill you quickly. I'll kill everyone you've ever loved, and I'll make you watch. Then I'll kill you. Do we understand each other? Hawk thought about Madison, about Jennifer, about everyone whose lives would end because he tried to be clever. We understand each other. Salazar nodded to his men. They climbed back into the SUVs and drove away, leaving Hawk standing in that abandoned lot with his heart hammering and his hands shaking and the wire recording everything. He made it back to his truck before he vomited. Park's team descended on the safe house that evening like a military operation, analyzing the recording and planning the final phase. Hawk sat in the corner, still tasting bile, while federal agents discussed him like he was a chess piece instead of a human being who'd just been threatened with the murder of his family. We move tomorrow, Park announced. Moss takes them to the storage unit. We've relocated the money to a facility we control. Same setup, different location. The moment Salazar's people verify the cash, we execute arrests. SWAT teams in position, helicopters overhead, the whole show. What about me? Hawk asked. You'll be extracted simultaneously. We get you out. Salazar goes down, and Richard Moss disappears into witness protection. You said I could walk away. No witness protection. Just walk away. Park's expression hardened. That was before Salazar threatened to kill your family. You're a federal witness now, Captain. That comes with protections whether you want them or not. Hawk stood, feeling the walls close in. I didn't risk everything to end up in some suburban hellhole with a new name and FBI babysitters. That wasn't the deal. The deal changed when you decided to commit multiple felonies. Park shot back. You want to argue about it? Or you want to finish this so your daughter doesn't end up in a cartel snuff film? The room went silent. Hawk felt every agent watching him, waiting to see if he'd break. But he'd been broken before, broken by the Air Force, broken by divorce, broken by irrelevance. What was left was something harder, something that had stolen $10 million from a cartel and survived. Let's finish it, Hawk said quietly. The next morning arrived with the particular clarity that comes before life-changing moments. Hawk drove to the controlled storage facility, a perfect replica of his original unit, complete with money the FBI had provided as bait. Park's team was everywhere, invisible but present, snipers and surveillance, and enough firepower to start a small war. Salazar arrived exactly on time, bringing 4 men who looked like they'd learned violence from doctoral programs. They followed Hawk into the unit, examined the money with scanners and test kits, and verified what Park's team had carefully prepared. $5 million in cartel cash, exactly as promised. Satisfied? Hawk asked. Salazar smiled, the expression of a shark that had just realized the seal wasn't getting away. Almost. There's one more thing I need to verify. He pulled out a phone, showed Hawk a photograph. It was Madison, walking across the Florida State campus, backpack over her shoulder, completely unaware that her father's crimes had painted a target on her back. Beautiful girl, Salazar said. I'd hate for anything to happen to her. Hawk's blood turned to ice. You said, I said I'd kill everyone you love if this was a setup. And Richard Moss, or should I say, Captain Mattheus Haaland, this feels very much like a setup. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Salazar knew. Somehow he knew. I don't know what you're. Salazar backhanded him, sending Hawk sprawling into the money pallets. Miguel talked before we killed him yesterday. Told us everything. About the FBI operation. About you. About the wire you're wearing right now. He gestured to his men. 2 of them grabbed Hawk, holding him while the third ripped open his shirt and found the wire. Impressive technology, Salazar said, examining the belt buckle device. But you see, Captain, I've been playing this game longer than your FBI handlers have been alive. Did you really think I'd walk into a trap without preparing my own? Outside, Hawk heard the sound every tactical operator dreads, gunfire. Lots of it. Salazar's backup team engaging Park surveillance units. The careful plan dissolving into chaos. Your people are dying out there, Salazar said casually. And soon, your daughter will die too. Unless... The explosion came from the front of the storage facility, a breaching charge that blew the doors inward. SWAT teams poured through, moving with the coordinated precision of federal agents who trained for exactly this scenario. Salazar's men went for their weapons, but they were outgunned and outmaneuvered. The firefight lasted less than 30 seconds. When the smoke cleared, 3 of Salazar's men were dead. 1 was wounded, and Salazar himself was on the ground, zip-tied, and screaming about lawyers and diplomatic immunity and every other desperate play criminals tried when the game was lost. Park appeared in the doorway, blood running from a cut above her eye, but alive. "Captain Haaland, you good?" Hawk nodded, unable to speak. The adrenaline, the fear, the impossible weight of everything that had just happened. It crashed over him like a wave. "Get him out of here," Park ordered. "Medical check, then debrief." But Hawk grabbed her arm. "Madison," he said, "already handled. We have protective custody on your family the moment you agreed to work with us. Your daughter's safe. She's at a secure location with agents who look like grad students. She doesn't even know she's being protected." The relief hit so hard Hawk's knees buckled. Agents caught him, guided him outside into sunlight that felt like absolution. Behind him, federal agents processed the scene, photographed the money, and began the paperwork that would ensure Joaquin Salazar spent the rest of his life in a supermax prison. 3 weeks later, in a bland conference room in a building whose location Hawk would never remember, Park handed him a folder. "Richard Moss's complete identity package," she said. "Social security number, driver's license, passport, bank accounts with enough seed money to start over. The car dealership and rental properties have been liquidated, legally, through proper channels. After taxes and fees, you've got about $2 million. Not bad for a dead man. What about my daughter? She still thinks you're dead. We've maintained that story. Your ex-wife received your life insurance payout. Madison graduated with honors last month. She's happy, Captain. She's safe." Hawk stared at the folder, at this manufactured life that was somehow more real than the one he'd been born into. "And I just walk away? After everything?" Park leaned back, studying him with an expression that was equal parts exhaustion and respect. "You committed multiple federal crimes, but you also helped us dismantle a major cartel financial network. Salazar's already flipping on his superiors to avoid the death penalty. We've got 14 additional arrests coming down the pipeline, millions in seized assets, and enough evidence to prosecute cases for the next 5 years. You earned this, Captain. Don't waste it. What do I tell people? About who I am, where I came from? Tell them you're Richard Moss, former insurance adjuster from Tulsa, looking for a fresh start. It's boring enough to be believable." She paused, then added softly, "For what it's worth, I think you're a better man than the choices you made. Maybe Richard Moss can be too." Hawk took the folder and walked out of that building into a sunny afternoon in Austin, Texas. He had a new name, a new life, and enough money to disappear properly this time. The man who'd been Captain Mattheus Haaland was dead, really dead, in all the ways that mattered. 6 months later, Richard Moss opened a small aviation school in Bozeman, Montana. He taught wealthy hobbyists how to fly, gave patient instruction to nervous students, and lived in a cabin with mountain views that made Tampa's rat-infested dumpster feel like a fever dream. He dated occasionally, kept mostly to himself, and developed a reputation as a quiet but competent instructor who had a way of staying calm in emergencies. Sometimes, late at night, he'd check Madison's social media from burner accounts. She'd started a job at a consulting firm in Atlanta, looked happy in photos with friends, lived a life unburdened by knowledge of what her father had done to secure her future. That was enough. It had to be enough. One evening, while reviewing flight plans for the next day's lessons, Richard, he reminded himself, always Richard now, received an unexpected email. No sender name, just a message. "Some cages are worse than death. You chose well. DP." He stared at those words, at Special Agent Denise Park's cryptic benediction, and felt something he hadn't experienced in longer than he could remember. Peace. Not happiness exactly. Not the triumphant joy of escaping consequences. Just peace. The quiet satisfaction of a man who'd gambled everything, survived the impossible, and found a way to live with the choices that had transformed him. Richard Moss deleted the email, poured himself 2 fingers of decent bourbon, not the bottom-shelf poison that had started this whole insane journey, and walked out onto his cabin's porch. The Montana sky spread overhead, vast and indifferent, full of stars that had watched men make terrible choices since the beginning of time. He'd stolen from cartels. He'd worked with the FBI. He'd faked his death and survived when everyone expected him to fail. The old Mattheus Haaland would have called it divine intervention. Richard Moss knew better. It was just math and luck and the desperate competence of a man who'd refused to die slowly in a cage of someone else's making. Somewhere in Florida, his daughter was living a life he'd purchased with blood money and federal cooperation. She'd never know the price. That was the gift he'd given her. Ignorance, safety, a future uncomplicated by his crimes. And here, in Montana, under stars that didn't judge, Richard Moss raised his glass to the man he used to be. "Thanks for dying," he whispered. "I'm living better without you." The bourbon tasted like freedom. And for the first time in longer than memory, the sky didn't feel like a cage at all. It felt like home. Thank you for watching till the end. We hope you sure learned a thing or two from Mattheus Haaland. Now a question for you, my dear folks. At what point does desperation justify crossing the line? Hawk had just stolen millions from people who'd murdered for far less, all to save his daughter's future. Was he a criminal, or just a father who'd run out of legal options? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Hawk was justified in what he did? Or did desperation just give him an excuse to become the very thing he'd spent 15 years fighting against? I want to hear what you think. Also, click on the image on your screen to watch more thrilling true crime cases, and don't forget to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons to stay updated with our latest content.